Welcome to this explainer. I am honestly so thrilled to have you here today because we're going to dismantle some deeply seated assumptions about how the modern hiring system actually works. Seriously, if you've ever felt like your job hunt is just completely disconnected from your actual professional value, well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the grand illusion of the modern job search, and we're going to show you the reality of the machine. Look, we've all felt the sheer, heavy emotional exhaustion of the search. You know the drill, right? You endlessly revise your resume. You move your strongest bullets higher. You basically compress decades of incredibly complex, nuanced professional history into, two perfectly formatted pages? You swap out your plain language for corporate jargon, and then you replace that with whatever buzzwords you think the system wants to hear. You feed endless applications into this massive digital black box, and you wait. And then, nothing. Just crickets. It's actually wild how quickly that silence breeds anxiety. There's a very specific point in the modern job search when the resume stops feeling like a professional document and, well, it starts feeling more like a confession. The system just swallows your entire professional history without a single solitary word of feedback. And man, self-doubt immediately sets in. You start wondering if you did something wrong or if your entire career somehow just doesn't measure up anymore. Okay, let's dive right into Section 1. Into the silence system, the symptom of ghosting. So why does the silence of the modern job search feel so intensely personal? Let's take a look at what ghosting actually does to a candidate's mindset. The source material gives us this absolutely brilliant realization. Silence invites self-interpretation. Because you don't get feedback, you are essentially forced to guess. Are you too old? Are you too expensive? Is your background too military? Maybe too specialized or too broad? The crazy thing is, the hiring system doesn't actually have to accuse you of anything. It literally just has to withhold a response long enough for you to begin supplying the accusation yourself. Silence transfers the entire burden of interpretation right onto the person with the least amount of information. Which brings us to Section 2, the volume trap, the diagnosis of saturated channels. So how do we actually adapt to all this silence? Well, we start treating the job search purely as a numbers game, and we get stuck in this really tragic behavioral loop. Think about it. You send an application, you receive total silence. And because you got zero feedback, you just assume you need more exposure, right? So you send out even more applications. Now, multiply that exact reaction by millions of job seekers, and the whole system gets completely overwhelmed. To cope with the flood, organizations start relying on cheaper, faster proxies to filter candidates, which, you guessed it, leads to even less feedback. It's ironic, really. The exact behavior applicants adopt to survive the opacity becomes the exact behavior employers use to justify more filtering. All of this leads us to a really heavy question. Why do perfectly good resumes fail? Like, why are incredibly capable veterans, seasoned executives, and brilliant generalists routinely ghosted by these systems when they apply for jobs they are genuinely 100% qualified to do? The answer lies in a concept called interpretive strain. See, the hiring machine isn't just automated. It is actively collapsing under the sheer weight of applicant volume. The system has more information, way more polished resumes, and more data than ever before. But it actually has way less confidence and far less shared understanding of what those signals even mean. When an organization is flooded with thousands of applications, it literally doesn't have the capacity to deeply read you. All right, let's move to Section 3. Qualified versus readable, the core paradigm shift. Now, this is absolutely crucial. There is a massive night and day difference between being qualified and being readable. Being qualified means you have the capability, the judgment, and the hands-on experience to do the work. But being readable, that means the hiring system can actually recognize that capability through the very limited flat signals available to it. Possessing a capability means absolutely nothing if the automated system or even a super hurried human reader cannot easily translate it. And this dynamic creates what the author calls being a stranger with a document. The author shares this incredibly powerful story of retiring from the Army after 33 years, 6 combat deployments, decades of deep, complex operational leadership and logistics. Now, inside the military, his reputation had memory, it had witnesses, it was a very high-trust environment. But the moment he transitioned out, all of that deep context was just stripped away. He became a total stranger with a 2-page document forced to prove his worth to a low-trust civilian system that really only saw confusing military jargon. His capability hadn't vanished, not at all, but his readability basically dropped to zero. Let's jump into Section 4, the interpretation problem, dismantling the matching myth.
Now, what's really interesting here is that the labor market heavily publicizes hiring as this clean, simple matching process. A company posts a job, you submit your qualifications, and boom, the best match wins. But the reality is a stark contrast. On one hand, you have the public job posting. It's polished, it's stable, it lists all the visible criteria. But then you have the operating reality. That's the actual, messy, unresolved reality of an organization's internal needs. The posting might ask for a project manager, sure, but the operating reality is they actually need someone to rescue a failing initiative without bruising the ego of the executive who originally ruined it. The applicant applies to the public story, but the organization, they hire based on the private reality. And because of that huge gap, meaning gets lost at literally every single stage. An applicant tracking system, it reads purely for keywords. A recruiter, they read for a shortlist fit. A hiring manager, they read for confidence. At every single step, your incredibly compressed 2-page document is being filtered through someone else's assumptions. As the source so perfectly notes, organizations do not run on information alone, they run on shared interpretation. If they can't interpret your resume, you simply don't move forward.
Moving on to Section 5, the invisible criteria, visualizing the unspoken rules. Let's finally pull back the curtain and look at the hidden forces that are actually shaping your job search. Risk, timing, internal politics, salary expectations, familiarity. You see, a hiring manager often isn't actually looking for the most excellent candidate. I know, that sounds crazy, but they are usually looking for the lowest risk candidate that they can easily defend to their bosses. If your resume requires a long, complex explanation to prove your worth, you represent a much higher risk than a candidate whose past job title just perfectly matches the open role. Familiarity simply feels safer. And all of this builds right into the concept of trust, which scales very, very differently across different channels. A cold application, that has incredibly low trust. To them, you are literally just a stranger with a document. AI summaries might bump you up slightly in keyword alignment, but they completely strip away your nuance. But a warm referral, oh man, that carries massive trust. A human witness finally gives your document context. They act as a translator, proving why your complex background is actually a perfect fit. They make you suddenly perfectly readable. So what's our real actionable takeaway here? Stop over-optimizing for a broken machine. Seriously, stop tweaking that same bullet point for the 50th time, hoping the black box will suddenly fall in love with you. You need to shift your focus away from proving you are qualified to proving you are interpretable. You have to translate your professional identity in a way that aggressively reduces a hiring manager's perceived risk. Provide the evidence, seek out those human trust channels, and do whatever you can to make their job of understanding you as easy as possible. I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought to really reframe your whole approach. Go look at your materials right now. Look at your resume, your profile, your entire networking strategy. You already know you can do the work. But can the system read you? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gives you the clarity you need to finally break through the noise.